I think it's kind of an underrated part of their defense is obviously what KD can provide as a help defender and just the length overall. One of the ways that Jimmy gets off in the regular season is mismatch hunting. It's one of the few ways that gets him in a flow early in games, and it feels like to me in this matchup, like that's going to be his key.
Welcome to another episode of Take That for Data. The format will be a little bit different, but we will still have the same premise. And as you all know, I'm the host here, Stephen Prejean Gardner. And we have a guest today, the one and only Brady Hawk. And Brady, obviously, if you don't know, covers the Miami Heat in a unique way from the way that anyone else does. And I feel like there's no better person to have. And it's also kind of poetic in the sense for our podcast here called Take That for Data, and the first of the new iteration to be speaking on the Miami Heat. So Brady, how you doing today, my man?
Doing good. Thank you for having me on, man.
I appreciate you. All right, let's go ahead and get it going. So the Miami Heat obviously at 500 right now, going into Saturday's game against the Phoenix Suns. What have been your general takeaways and assessments of the Heat in this early kind of first quarter of the season?
I mean, I think the big takeaway is they're pretty average. Like at this point in the season, I mean, you just mentioned they're 10-10. If you looked at their net rating before this last game, it was 0.0. It was 15th in the league. They were just dead middle average, and I think you've kind of seen that with their consistency overall. Like you've seen games where they kind of bring it on both ends of the floor, and then there's games where the defense has lapses, and there's games where the offense has lapses. There's just there's been so many lineup changes throughout this season for Miami. They've kind of trying to figure out mixes. Like it came into the season where it was all about their four best players playing together: Tyler Herro, Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, and Terry Rozier. And now 20 games in, we're at a point where Terry Rozier is the sixth man, where he's not even in the starting lineup, where they're trying to figure out these different combinations. So look, to me, my biggest takeaway is that the Miami Heat are always going to be a defensive first team, even when this roster doesn't look like it's a lot of really good individual defenders. And it feels to me like they have to lean into that. They're not going to be a team like Phoenix is going to score the ball. Miami's never going to be a team that's going to go out there and outscore Phoenix. They're going to have to get it done on the defensive end to win games. And it feels like they're slowly figuring that out and transitioning into that in a way.
Yeah, for sure. And just kind of look a little bit even further into it at obviously one of the best coaches in the league with Erik Spoelstra. Feels like this season, some of it because of injuries, some of it because he's still trying to figure out this roster. It's been a lot of kind of gray areas that have led to things that are not necessarily his typical. I think one of the instances being the timeout that was asked for that you all did not have, or that they did not have sometime last week, which was really different for what Heat culture kind of stands for in terms of discipline and things like that. What's been your kind of assessment of his post-check and kind of reach for this particular team this season so far?
It kind of just feels to me like he's trying everything because this roster, as you know, it's pretty much the same roster as it's been the last few years. So like he's in a position where he's just moving deck chairs around. Like he doesn't have new pieces to kind of get creative with. The scouting report's the same year over year against this team because it's the similar players. And I think now it's just at a point where he's trying different combinations. One of them has been Tyler Herro and Duncan Robinson have been on this team since the 1920 season. They haven't logged a lot of minutes together. And now they're at a point now where he's kind of trying to bounce off their shooting together. And Duncan's kind of been more on the ball these last few years. Tyler is transitioning more off the ball. So they're playing them more together, and it's kind of giving them a new look to the offense. So that's one thing. I think a lot of people are calling for their first-round rookie to play a little bit more. They want to play bigger. I think a lot of Heat fans want to see them play bigger. But Spo is just such a small ball type coach that it just doesn't feel like he's going to lean into that. So there's like certain things that you could see he's trying to like figure out throughout the season. But like I said before, I think the number one thing when you look at Erik Spoelstra is he's never going to be a coach that's going to be in these like 124 to 122 games. He needs to be like in a game where they're clawing to hit 100. Like he's such a defensive coach. Like you've seen, he's kind of started this trend where the whole league's playing zone now. And it all started from Miami kind of bringing this out and kind of playing the press in the zone. And he's still going to it here and there, not as much, just because now there's so much film on it across the league and so many teams are just ready for it. But that's kind of the key for me with Spo. It's like the timeout thing, I think that was just like a mishap. Like him just that was like an in-game thing where he just got carried away. Jimmy's trying to play a few more games, obviously, than last year. It's kind of been a key focus, and that helps Spo, I think, kind of schematically get through a regular season. But my big takeaway, it feels like he's slowly transitioning more into the defensive end and just trying to get games a little bit lower scoring, which is hard to do in this NBA right now.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned Tyler Herro had a rather loud performance last matchup against the Los Angeles Lakers. How have you kind of assessed his skill development? I know you paid close attention to his ball handling, how secure the ball feels with his hand versus how it was earlier in his career. The reason he's making a pick and roll, like skill development wise, what do you feel like has served him best so far this season, and what do you kind of project going forward for him towards the end of the season?
This is by far the biggest jump he's ever made in his career. Like in terms of he came in and he pretty much said they talked to him in the offseason about changing up his shot profile. Um, he's such a good mid-range shooter. And it's funny talking about Phoenix on the other side because it's pretty similar to a couple of those guys. But
Yeah.
Tyler watched a lot of Devin Booker. I mean, two Kentucky guys, and he's talked about how much he's kind of watched his game. But they wanted him to cut out the mid ranges and turn them into more threes and layups. And he's pretty much taken that information and ran with it. Like he's shooting no mid ranges anymore. And he's kind of like this last game where you just mentioned the 3-point shooting at 7 threes in the third quarter. He's shot 16 threes overall. And Erik Spoelstra after the game's talking about he wants him to get to 20 3-point attempts in the game. Like they're kind of pushing him this direction. And credit to him. Like he's really taken this information and ran with it. He's been much more efficient. They want him to play a little bit more off the ball. It's kind of crazy to hear because it's with Jimmy in and out of the lineup, it almost seems like Tyler has to be on the ball, but they found ways for him to be a little bit more of a spot up shooter because he's so good at it. Like he's such a good spot up shooter that it's like he's been forced this on ball role, which he's good at as well. But it almost feels like when you're that good of just a straight up shooter, you have to be utilized in that way. So they've kind of found a ways for him to do that. Partly, using Bam more as a playmaker has kind of forced Tyler off the ball and into those spots. And he's flourishing in it. Like he's a legitimate all-star, having an all-star start to this season right now. And that's as big of a jump as I've seen from him. The biggest knock in him over the years has been the defensive end and kind of sustaining that. And he's been a lot better on defense. He's been holding his ground and one-on-one. He's been good team defensively. He's generated steals. He's been like, if you talk, from Miami's point of view, like he's been the one bright spot for this team. Some young guys might not be getting as many reps as a lot of people wanted, but Tyler Herro is absolutely flourishing, and he's showing that he could carry a team on a night-to-night basis in the regular season.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely what I've observed too in the games that I've been able to catch from the Heat this season. But you mentioned Bam Adebayo and kind of using him more as like a primary playmaker in multiple respects. So I think that's a perfect transition to speaking a little bit about him. We saw him in Team USA ball over the summer, playing off the ball, knocking down threes, sometimes initiating offense and grabbing go scenarios, flowing in the dribble handoffs, things like that. What's maybe one or two of the biggest growth areas offensively that you've seen from him, whether it be how he's featured, whether it be skill development, etc.?
So I'll say first, I think a lot of people thought the scoring was going to take a jump this season after, you mentioned the USA stuff. I think you saw a confidence jump from him, that he had a huge season last year scoring the ball. And it's just been down this year. Like it has not been as efficient and as effective as a scorer. The 3-point shooting's there, here and there, but it's kind of taken away from his stuff inside, in the lane, in the mid range and all that stuff. But with that said, it's kind of opened up, like I said, the stuff with him as a playmaker. Like he had back-to-back games with 10 assists. They're just using him more into this system where they want to just try to move everybody constantly. Like they want a full-out motion offense and have Tyler and Duncan and kind of Jimmy roaming the baseline and all this stuff just constantly moving. And Bam's kind of the quarterback to it all. So you see a lot of Heat fans on a night basis where they see Bam has 14 points and he's inefficient, but it's like he's controlling everything in the offense. Like he's the reason why all they're shooting 40% from three on the night, because he's creating all those looks, his screening, his rolling gravity, and just hitting guys constantly in the pockets that is available to him. So, and we know obviously what he does defensively. It's always going to be there. He's just kind of impactful on that end. But as much as we've seen that growth playmaking wise, I'll be honest, I think that the only way Miami's going to take this next step from being average and not being 500 is for him to take the jump scoring wise again, like he did last year. And it's not really a jump. He just has to get back to it. He has to just get back to being aggressive. As we talked about a few years ago, I think a lot of people, even in the national media, were talking about Bam. Like there was a next level to get to. Like he has such talent there that he needs to kind of be just more assertive as a scorer. And I think that's what it's going to come down to, getting back to that. And then you add in the playmaking that he's hitting right now and all that other stuff. And now you have a pretty difficult player to scheme up against.
For sure. Just a kind of off script question from me. Just kind of looking at the Heat. Do you feel like Bam would benefit from maybe more stability at the point guard position for this group in terms of someone being able to put him in position?
I think that's one of the fair things because I mean Duncan Robinson is their best probably lob thrower
Yeah,
on the team, which
yeah.
is insane to say. Like it really is. I mean that's ultimately what they brought Kyle in for a few years ago.
Mhm.
Obviously that didn't work out to the degree that they wanted it to, but in the first year it did. In the regular season, if you look back, it did open up Bam in a lot of ways. He found him on the roll. He would get him the ball in his spots and clear out. Like he did a good job at that. And now your guard room is just full of guys like Terry who he can get Bam the ball, but he's a score first guy. He's not like a point
Yeah.
guard, traditional point guard that's going to get Bam to spots. I think Bam's kind of beyond that now. Like I thought early on when they got Kyle, he needed it more than he does now. It just feels like we're reverting back a little bit. It feels like Bam has the ability he's at a level now where he could just go score, like go grab the ball
Mhm.
face up and go get a bucket.
Mhm.
But I don't think it's crazy. Like even it doesn't even have to be like a high level
Mhm.
starting point guard. Like I just think it's like getting a guy off the bench, like even the Tyus Jones type, like anybody. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah,
it's just getting that type of point guard stability. And that's kind of the one thing they don't have. They're using a lot of their wings and bigs to kind of play make.
for sure. All right. Well, we'll transition to the Suns side, and I'll give you the mic and for any questions that you might have about the Suns.
So I'll ask first. What do you feel like is their kind of offensive game plan when they are without Kevin Durant? Because I think a lot of people were kind of wondering what this game was going to look like. And obviously, KD's not going to be in this game on Saturday against Miami. So, what do you feel like changes in their offense when KD's not playing?
Well, for one, you have your ultimate piece to dictate with, where regardless of what context the offense you flow him into, whether it be a post up, whether it be a middle touch, an isolation, whether it be an elbow touch, pick and roll, he's gonna get two or sometimes two and a half to the ball, where it's the two players directly involved and help from somewhere outside of that. And I think that's where they've really hurt teams because they've been able to play off of that short roll with their center group, but they've also been able to use guards as the screeners and play into, getting into ghost screens and playing and putting the guards in the short roll and spraying off of that. So that changes a little bit because though Devin Booker does get two to the ball, Kevin Durant's two to the ball hits a little differently in terms of how many of the defense's capital is conceded to him. So it changes a little bit in that front. But I do feel like they're looking to one of the biggest things with Devin Booker is get him the ball early in offense, get him off it early, and get it to him early in the shot clock. So, for example, say Bam Adebayo makes a layup, and whoever it is that's inbounding the ball for the Suns gets it in immediately to Tyus Jones. There's a synergy and communication between Jones and Devin Booker, and even Monte Morris and Devin Booker, where Booker gets way ahead of the ball and he gets to the strong side of the floor, takes that initial matchup that's on him and immediately puts him in the post. And usually that either makes the defense shift or they're not set yet, of course, because it's like 22 seconds on the clock. He can just go quickly, or he'll flow into a pistol action where he screens for the person on ball, flips the matchups, and then flows from there. I think they've been trying to really emphasize getting into the quick hitting fashion to then obviously put defenses in scramble with more time on the clock. And I think when they're getting into those layers of their offense, that's where they've been at their best. Naturally, you asked about Devin Booker, but they can feature and they have featured Bradley Beal in those exact same scenarios. They're very interchangeable in that sense. And I think that's one way that they're looking to tilt defenses more consistently.
So I'll play off that. I think you mentioned kind of Booker kind of seeing these doubles now. I think
Yeah.
without KD, how big how big is Beal in these matchups? Because I feel Beal's played well against Miami in the past. Like it's been a matchup that I think Miami actually might switch a ton against this without KD. I think they'll probably switch everything a good
Yep.
amount of this game.
Mhm.
How big is Beal? You think in this matchup?
He's huge. And he's huge in this matchup and generally speaking for the Suns because in my honest opinion in assessing them, I know people talk about the three-point volume and the accuracy and whatnot, but it's the why and how they generate the shots that they want to. Paint touch is the king for the Suns. They can get paint touches in multiple ways. No one's as dominant with their paint touches as Bradley Beal. He has the quickest first step on the team. He's the best driver on the team. Though he doesn't get two to the ball in the same ways that Devin Booker and Kevin Durant do within this Suns context, his drives, as you know, flatten out a defense. That gets like four to the ball sometimes, especially if he blows past the point of attack. And for looking at the Heat this season, point of attack defense hasn't necessarily been the strongest thing. So I think that's something that with Bradley Beal in particular, if he's living in a paint, he gets 20, 25 paint touches in a multitude of ways as a driver, as a cutter, early in offense off of post-ups. That's where he can really kind of undo things. And we saw him get into a little bit of that in their game last night. And obviously that didn't come in a win, but that served as one of his most efficient and effective games offensively, largely because of the paint touches.
So on the other side of it, you mentioned the Heat's kind of the point attack stuff and what we were talking about what Miami could do defensively. On the theme of Kevin Durant not playing, what do you think changes for them defensively? I mean, I think it's kind of an underrated part of their defense is obviously what KD can provide as a help defender and just the length overall. One of the ways that Jimmy gets off in the regular season is mismatch hunting. It's one of the few ways that gets him in a flow early in games. And it feels like to me in this matchup, like that's going to be his key. It's going to be like, also, by the way, just a total side note, whenever he has like a friend on the other team or somebody he knows, he decides to play a little harder. Like people make jokes about it because some nights he takes nights off and here and there. Tyus Jones is one of those guys. But I do think Tyus Jones, some of those guys are some guys who'll miss much. What do you think changes for them defensively just without Kevin Durant?
Well, the first thing you mentioned is the size dissipating for them. Kevin Durant's 7'1", whether he wants to accept it or not, he's 7'1", and he has a 7'5" wingspan, and that's your 4. That's your secondary rim protector in most respects. So you take him out of the rotation, and you take his past just his physical stature, you take away his acumen. He's a preemptive communicator. He's always loud and early with his rotations. When you have someone that's so consistently on schedule and ahead of schedule, out of the rotation, you take a kind of monstrous hit in many respects. I feel like they're like 25th or 26th, definitely bottom third when he's not in the lineup for them on the defensive end of the floor. And it's largely because of those things. I call him a switch anchor in a sense because he's able to cover up for a lot of the switching that they like to do up top by kicking guys out and scramming guys out of the post and things like that. So when you don't have that switch anchor defensively, it changes the approach and outlook of your team. I think one of the biggest things that we've learned about the Suns in this context this season is that with Oso Ighodaro, when he's in at the 5, they can get into those switching things, and the synergy that him and Kevin Durant have defensively is something that is really going to be a pillar for this team when they're building out their defensive process when they're whole. You take him away from that, you can still get into switching elements. You have players like Royce O'Neal, you have players like Ryan Dunn who can kind of facilitate in similar manners. They just don't have that wingspan and that stature. And you can see that teams, when Durant is on the floor with Ighodaro, they don't attack the basket in the same ways that they do when Ighodaro is at the 5 and it's Royce O'Neal that's at the 4 or at the 3 next to him. Right. So I think that's maybe the presentation part of defense more than anything when Durant's not out there is what kind of shifts the way teams approach attacking them.
You mentioned the Ighodaro matchup. He's going to be probably guarding Kevin Love for a good portion of time. So that's kind of a really interesting matchup because Love is the constant blitz guy and he's the spacing guy. And then obviously you have the switching guy on the other side. Two total different game plans. So that'll be interesting to watch. Last one I'll get for you is, I mean, the Suns are kind of in a similar spot as Miami when it comes to like, they're 12-9. They're kind of in this like average stage. It's a little bit different because they've been kind of, injuries in and out. I was like a 15th in points per game, 15th in rebounds per game. So like I was betting with Miami being dead middle, the Suns have kind of been middle of the pack as well. Even I think their 3-point shooting is pretty close. I think Miami and Phoenix are both around like 38%. So what do you think kind of the difference maker in this matchup? Is it kind of bench scoring? Is it the 3-point shooting, kind of whoever has a hotter night? What kind of sticks out to you? It's like what's kind of the difference maker in this game?
I think the contrast in styles stemming directly from each team's the side of the floor they identify with most. So you talked about Miami being always a defensive-minded team, a defensive-minded franchise, quite honestly, especially since Erik Spoelstra has been there. On the Suns side, Mike Budenholzer is one of the offensive geniuses of the NBA when it comes to spacing, the nuances with that, the evolution in that, obviously the context he's inherited with Bradley Beal and Devin Booker. Whoever plays to their strengths better in this game, I think, is who's ultimately going to win it. Now, naturally, it looks a little different when you take Kevin Durant from the equation, but the Suns still have to play to their strengths. And I think they're still a team that's figuring out their identity in terms of how they want to approach games when Kevin Durant is not on the floor, whether he's resting within the rotation or if he's just literally not in the lineup because of injury. And we've seen a lot of inconsistencies, largely stemming from they're not necessarily sure how they always want to go to approaching offense. Sometimes they want to have it where Durant or Devin Booker is initiating. That's always going to get to the ball. But it's like, and then what? You can't always get to the same scenario, always hitting the short roll and then trying to spray off of that, because that becomes far too predictable or robotic. You have to have more nuance to it. So that them adding more of the small screens, I think they screen with their smalls more than any other game they have this season in their most recent matchup. And I think that's something we'll see a lot of in terms of for mismatch hunting, but also to keep Bam Adebayo out of being directly involved in action as much as they possibly can. And on the flip side for the Heat, if they're getting into their switching, which they'll inevitably do, like you mentioned, against this Suns team, but also if they're able to sprinkle in a little bit of zone after timeouts, where the Suns have been one of the best teams in terms of points per possession, and kind of just taking away the margins and really winning those margins, I think that's where the Heat can really kind of take it to the Suns and potentially establish a little bit more rhythm on their side of the ball that they identify with most.
I agree. I think specifically the offense versus defense stuff. Like I just wonder how Miami's going to approach it without Durant. Like they've usually, like, if let's give the example like the Hawks, like when they play Trae Young, they're just gonna absolutely blitz and get the ball out of his hands. But I think it changes in their minds when they do play a team with like a Beal type. I just think they're going to be a little bit more level headed, and I think it's going to be a lot more switching, and it's going to be a battle that we've seen over and over again where Miami wants to get Bam in the ball screen so they can just switch it out completely and force you to play through somebody else. Whereas the opposing team in Phoenix is going to keep Bam in that corner and try to get Tyler or Duncan or anybody else on these guys. And then it's going to be a double in rotation. So that little chess match is going to be interesting tomorrow.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to ask you too, in the Suns' most recent matchup, we saw a lot of switching doubles. I'm curious, is that something that you feel like the Heat would use with Devin Booker in particular? Because I don't think they're gonna like all out blitz him for the entire game. Just kind of looking at how they'll be looking at trying to put coverage on Devin Booker specifically.
I think if like we said, if Tyler, Duncan, or some of those guys get switched onto him, they're immediately doubling. It's just what they like. They're going to get the ball out of his hands quickly. If Kevin Love is in the game, he's going to blitz and double. I think for the out the gate, you're probably going to see like Haywood Highsmith guarding Devin Booker, and they're going to just try and fight over probably early on, like probably a hedge and recover type thing. I just think the only way they're really going to do it is if the lineups where maybe Booker and Beal are being staggered. I think maybe you see a little more, but out the gate, I think it's going to be a little bit more of a traditional type defense one-on-one and let Haywood and Jimmy kind of deal with Beal and Booker.
Okay. And you think Haywood would get the initial Devin Booker matchup?
I would think so. I'm trying to think who else is. I mean, they'll probably put somebody. Bam might start on Plumlee, but they've done things before where they'll put like somebody else in and like just like force them to play through a guy like Plumlee. Like they'll like almost like let Bam guard somebody else. But they'll probably put Bam and Plumlee out the gate. And I would think they would probably like a Tyler type would probably guard Royce O'Neal. They've done that before where they'll just kind of put him on a weak side. So like that's the kind of thing we were talking about. Like Royce O'Neal will be the guy in that case. We'll see a lot of screening. Like he'll be the constant screening and rolling, working the short roll, and he'll have to either make that short jumper or he'll have to kind of make that pass to the weak side corner. So like those are the little things I guess in this matchup that'll be interesting. But I would expect Haywood and Jimmy to get Beal and Booker in some facet.
Okay, for sure. All right, well, I feel like we've covered this game in a preview sense fairly well. I appreciate you for your time always, Brady. And shout out to all of the folks over at 5 Reasons Sports. You all do amazing work. And we're looking forward to talking to you soon. But until then, I appreciate you all for tapping in with us. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I'll be looking forward to more Take That for Data episodes in the near future. And that being said, enjoy your weekend. Thanks for tapping in.